I thought I had the perfect setup living with my parents in our cozy suburban Denver home. At 28, I was contributing $800 a month in rent splitting groceries and genuinely enjoying family dinners every Sunday. My relationship with my parents, Robert and Susan, felt solid and loving. I believed I was their cherished daughter, the responsible one who had her life together. Working as an accountant downtown, I felt proud contributing to our household while saving money for my future. Everything seemed perfectly balanced in our little family dynamic until that Tuesday evening when my brother Derek called from California with news that would completely shatter my understanding of where I actually stood in my family. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. Have you ever felt like the forgotten child in your family? Because what happened next made me realize just how invisible I had become. Let me tell you exactly how my parents decided to turn my world upside down. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening while I was organizing my tax documents at the kitchen table. Derek sounded different, his usual confident tone replaced by something hollow and defeated. My 32-year-old brother had always been the golden child, the tech guy living his California dream with his wife Amanda in their expensive San Francisco apartment. But that night, everything had crumbled around him. Derek had lost his job at the startup he had been working for 3 years. The company went under after losing major funding, leaving him scrambling in a competitive market. Worse, Amanda had served him divorce papers just 2 weeks later, claiming she could not handle the stress and uncertainty. Their 3-year marriage dissolved as quickly as his career prospects. He needed to come home to Denver. He explained just temporarily while he figured out his next steps. My heart broke for him. Despite our sibling rivalry growing up, I genuinely cared about Derek and wanted to help him through this difficult time. I told him our family would support him, that home would always be there when he needed it. I pictured him sleeping in the guest room, maybe staying for a few months while he networked and applied for new positions. It seemed like a reasonable family crisis response. The next evening, my parents called me into the living room for what they termed a family meeting. Robert and Susan sat on the burgundy leather couch, their expressions serious and somewhat uncomfortable. The afternoon light streaming through the bay windows seemed dimmer than usual as they began explaining Derek's situation and what they believed needed to happen. Robert cleared his throat and began speaking in that measured tone he used for important announcements. Derek needed space to recover. He explained somewhere peaceful, where he could rebuild his confidence and restart his career. The guest room would not be sufficient for a man going through such a traumatic life change. Derek needed the master bedroom, the larger space with the private bathroom and walk-in closet. He deserved comfort during this challenging period. Susan nodded enthusiastically, adding that Derek had been through enough upheaval and deserved to feel truly at home. She mentioned how the master bedroom had better lighting for video calls with potential employers, and the attached bathroom would give him the privacy he needed to process his emotions. They spoke about my brother like he was recovering from a serious illness, rather than experiencing a common life setback. When I suggested I could move to the guest room to accommodate Derek, my parents exchanged glances that made my stomach clench. Robert shifted uncomfortably, and Susan looked down at her hands. That was when they delivered the news that would change everything between us. They thought it would be best if I found my own apartment somewhere nearby where I could visit regularly, but where Derek could have the entire house to focus on healing. But here came the twist that left me speechless. Even though I would be moving out, they expected me to continue paying my $800 monthly rent. The reasoning they explained was that the family needed financial stability during this crisis. Derek did not have any income, and they wanted to help him without straining their own retirement budget. My contribution would ease the financial pressure and allow them to support Derek properly. I sat there processing this information, trying to understand how moving out while continuing to pay rent made any logical sense. They spoke about it so matter-of-factly, as if asking me to fund my own displacement was a reasonable family sacrifice. Derek needed time to heal, they repeated, and I was young and capable of adapting to change. The following weeks became a whirlwind of apartment hunting on a budget that made no financial sense. I was essentially looking for places that cost $800 or less, since I was still expected to contribute that amount to my parents' household budget. In Denver's competitive rental market, $800 would barely cover a studio apartment 45 minutes from my office, let alone somewhere decent and convenient. Meanwhile, my parents threw themselves into preparing for Derek's return. Susan spent entire days shopping for organic foods. Derek preferred restocking the pantry with expensive coffee and specialty snacks. Robert worked in the garage every evening, converting the space into what he called Derek's man cave, complete with a large screen television and comfortable seating area. They painted the master bedroom in calming neutral tones and bought new bedding curtains and furniture. Watching their enthusiasm for Derek's homecoming while they pressured me to find somewhere else to live created a strange disconnect in my mind. I kept telling myself this arrangement was temporary, that Derek would get back on his feet quickly and I could return home. But deep down, something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Derek's return felt like a royal homecoming rather than a temporary family refuge. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon with 2 large suitcases and an air of wounded dignity that my parents immediately embraced. The reunion scene in our driveway looked like something from a movie, with lengthy hugs, tears, and whispered reassurances that everything would be better now. That evening's dinner set the tone for what would become our new family dynamic. Susan had prepared prime rib, Derek's favorite meal, complete with roasted vegetables and a bottle of wine that Robert had been saving for special occasions. The dining room table was set with our good china and cloth napkins. Derek regaled us with stories about his struggles in California, painting himself as a victim of corporate greed and a heartless ex-wife who had abandoned him during his darkest hour. My parents hung on every word, offering sympathy and reassurance. Robert talked about the importance of family supporting each other through difficult times. Susan mentioned how proud she was that Derek felt comfortable coming home, that he knew his family would always be there for him. I sat at the table feeling increasingly invisible, like a background character in Derek's dramatic comeback story. During his first week home, Derek made no apparent effort to look for employment or establish any kind of routine. He spent most days sleeping until noon, then moving to the living room to watch Netflix or play video games on the PlayStation Robert had bought him as a welcome home gift. Susan brought him meals on a tray and handled his laundry without being asked. Robert gave Derek full access to his car for what he called exploring opportunities, though Derek mainly used it to drive to the gym or meet college friends for coffee. Meanwhile, I continued paying my $800 monthly contribution, while Derek contributed absolutely nothing to household expenses. When I gently asked about his timeline for getting back on his feet, Derek became defensive, explaining that he needed time to process the trauma of losing both his job and his marriage simultaneously. He spoke about his situation like it was a unique tragedy, rather than a common life experience that millions of people navigate without being supported by their siblings' rent money. My apartment search became increasingly frustrating as Denver's rental market proved challenging for my artificially limited budget. Properties within $800 were either in unsafe neighborhoods, ridiculously small, or required long commutes that would eat up gas money and time. Decent one-bedroom apartments were renting for $1,500 or more, which would have doubled my housing costs while I continued supporting Derek's lifestyle. My parents seemed completely oblivious to my housing struggles, instead focusing all their attention on Derek's comfort and emotional state. They never asked about my apartment viewings or offered to help with the search. Their conversation centered entirely around Derek's needs, Derek's feelings, and Derek's plans. When I tried to join these discussions, they would listen politely before steering the conversation back to their primary concern. The double standard became more apparent daily. Derek had expensive food delivered through apps like DoorDash, charging $50 meals to my parents' credit card without asking permission. He ordered clothes and electronics online, treating their Amazon account like his personal shopping fund. When Susan mentioned the increased credit card bills, Robert dismissed her concerns, saying Derek deserved some comfort after everything he had been through. I began noticing Derek's social media posts about his self-care journey and personal growth time, complete with photos of expensive coffee drinks and new workout gear. He was not actually job hunting or taking concrete steps toward independence. Instead, he was enjoying an extended vacation funded by our parents and subsidized by my rent payments. When I mentioned this observation to Derek directly, he accused me of being selfish and unsupportive during his healing process. The most painful realization was that my parents had completely reorganized their priorities around Derek's comfort while treating my needs as secondary inconveniences. They had transformed from the loving, fair minded parents I thought I knew into people who could ask their daughter to pay rent for a house she was not allowed to live in, while their adult son contributed nothing and received everything. 3 months into this arrangement, I was having coffee with my coworker Maya when she made an observation that cut straight to the heart of my situation. Maya had been listening to my family drama for weeks, growing increasingly concerned about how my parents were treating me. She finally said what I had been too afraid to acknowledge myself. This was not normal family support, and my parents were treating me like a tenant rather than their daughter. Maya pointed out that healthy families do not make one child homeless to accommodate another child's comfort. She asked me to consider what Derek had actually sacrificed for the family compared to what was being demanded from me. The answer was uncomfortable and obvious. Derek had sacrificed nothing while expecting everything, and I was enabling this dynamic by continuing to pay for the privilege of being displaced from my own home. That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew quickly into full awareness of how unfairly I was being treated. I began paying closer attention to my parents' behavior and comments looking for evidence of the favoritism that Maya suggested was happening. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined. The following week, I came home early from work to grab some documents and overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. They did not know I was in the house, and their conversation revealed truths that shattered my remaining illusions about our family dynamic. Susan was expressing her happiness about having Derek home and mentioned that he had hinted about staying for at least a year, possibly longer. She sounded thrilled about this prospect. Robert agreed, saying they could use my rent money to help Derek start some kind of business venture he had been discussing. They talked about Derek like he was their most precious investment, while discussing my financial contribution like it was a convenient resource for funding their favorite child's dreams. Susan mentioned that Derek deserved this support after what Amanda had done to him, and that I was capable of taking care of myself. Most devastating was Robert's comment that Derek had always been their achiever, their success story, while I was reliable but unremarkable. They spoke about me with mild affection but clear dismissal, like I was a functional but unimportant part of their lives. I realized this arrangement was never intended to be temporary, and they had been planning to use my rent money to support Derek indefinitely while expecting me to quietly disappear into my own apartment. Standing in the hallway listening to my parents plan my permanent displacement, I felt something inside me break and rebuild simultaneously. The hurt was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a clarity that had been missing for months. This was not about Derek's temporary crisis or family sacrifice. This was about deeply rooted favoritism and financial exploitation disguised as family loyalty. That evening at dinner, I decided to confront the situation directly. I asked my parents how long they expected this arrangement to continue, pointing out that I had been looking for apartments for 6 weeks without finding anything suitable within my artificially restricted budget. Their responses confirmed everything I had overheard earlier. Robert told me Derek needed time and that I was young and adaptable. Susan added that Derek had been through trauma and deserved family support during his recovery. Derek himself promised he would be out in a few months, just as soon as he got his life together. But their body language and tone told a different story. They had no intention of encouraging Derek to leave, and they expected me to accept permanent exile while funding Derek's extended stay. The final insult came 2 days later when I returned home to find that Derek had moved all my personal belongings down to the basement. He had taken over not just the master bedroom, but the guest room as well, converting it into his home office. My childhood photos, books, and personal items were packed in boxes and relegated to the basement storage area. When I confronted Derek about moving my things without permission, he casually explained that he needed space for his equipment and that I would be moving out anyway. He spoke like my displacement was a foregone conclusion and my belongings were obstacles to his comfort. When I appealed to Susan about this violation of my personal space, she sided with Derek, explaining that he was setting up his business and these were just material things. In that moment, I realized I was being systematically erased from my own family. My financial contributions were welcome, but my actual presence was treated as an inconvenience to be managed. Derek was not just taking my bedroom, he was taking my place in the family hierarchy, and my parents were actively helping him do it. That night, sitting among my boxed belongings in the basement, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the family ATM machine. I was done funding my own displacement while Derek lived like a prince. And I was absolutely done pretending this situation was temporary or reasonable. Instead of continuing my apartment search, I began quietly researching my rights as a long-term resident and documenting the financial dynamics of our household. I had been living in the house for 5 years, paying rent consistently, and had established legal residency. My parents could not simply evict me without proper notice, regardless of their family relationship with me. I also began tracking expenses, documenting how much Derek was actually costing my parents compared to my contributions. Credit card statements showed Derek was spending over $3,000 monthly on food delivery, shopping, and entertainment, while contributing absolutely nothing to household expenses. Meanwhile, I was being asked to pay rent for a house I was not allowed to live in. I opened a separate savings account and began depositing my $800 rent payments there instead of giving them to my parents. This money would become crucial for my upcoming power move. I researched tenant rights and discovered that as a long-term resident who had been paying rent, I had significant legal protections against arbitrary displacement. When the next rent payment was due, I called another family meeting. This time, I was the one setting the agenda. I sat my parents and Derek down in the living room and made an announcement that caught them completely off guard. I was not moving out, and I was not paying rent anymore unless Derek started contributing equally to household expenses. Robert immediately objected, pointing out that this was their house, and they could make whatever arrangements they wanted. I calmly explained that I had been living there for 5 years, paying rent consistently, and had established legal residency. They would need to give me proper 30-day written notice if they wanted me to leave, and evicting a tenant without cause could create legal complications they probably wanted to avoid. Derek panicked, demanding to know how he was supposed to get the space he needed if I would not move out. I told him he was welcome to find his own apartment just like any other adult who needed housing. I pointed out that I was contributing financially while he was only taking, and that his temporary crisis had turned into permanent entitlement at my expense. Susan accused me of threatening my own family, but I corrected her. I was not threatening anyone. I was simply refusing to be exploited any longer. Family should not mean one child becoming homeless so another child could live in luxury. Family should not mean paying rent for a house you are not allowed to inhabit. Derek's reaction revealed his true character more clearly than anything he had said during his months of supposed recovery. He threw a complete tantrum, shouting about how I was ruining his fresh start and destroying his chance to rebuild his life. He grabbed dishes from the kitchen counter and threw them on the floor, screaming that he deserved this support after everything he had been through. I remained calm during his outburst, which seemed to infuriate him even more. I told Derek that everyone goes through difficult times, but hardship does not entitle anyone to someone else's home or money. I explained that I loved him, but love did not mean enabling his entitlement or allowing him to treat me like a disposable family member. When Derek tried emotional manipulation, claiming he thought I loved him and wanted to help him, I clarified my position. I did love him, and I would happily help him in ways that did not require me to sacrifice my own housing or financial stability. But I would not continue funding a lifestyle he had not earned while being treated like an unwelcome tenant in my own home. The confrontation forced my parents to see Derek's behavior clearly for the first time. His violent reaction to being asked to take responsibility for himself revealed that his wounded victim persona was largely an act designed to manipulate their sympathy. Adults going through legitimate hardships do not throw dishes when asked to contribute to their own support. I gave my family a simple ultimatum: either Derek and I would both contribute equally to household expenses and share space respectfully, or Derek could find his own place to live. I would no longer subsidize his lifestyle while being displaced from my own home. The choice was theirs, but I was done participating in an arrangement that exploited my family loyalty while rewarding Derek's entitlement. Within 2 weeks, Derek had found a roommate situation downtown and moved out of the house. Faced with the reality that my parents could not afford to support him long-term without my rent contributions, and recognizing that his demands were unreasonable, he finally took responsibility for his own housing. My parents apologized for the way they had handled the situation, acknowledging that they had shown unfair favoritism and put me in an impossible position. 6 months later, I used my saved rent money to renovate the basement into a private suite with its own entrance bathroom and kitchenette. My relationship with my parents improved significantly once we established clear boundaries about respect and financial fairness. Derek texts occasionally, and our relationship is cordial but distant. He never acknowledged how his behavior affected me, but I no longer needed his validation to feel good about standing up for myself. This experience taught me that self-respect is not selfish, and family should lift everyone up rather than sacrificing one person for another's comfort. Sometimes the people who love us most can hurt us deepest by taking our loyalty for granted. But standing up for yourself, even within your family, is not betrayal. It is necessary for maintaining your dignity and teaching others how to treat you with respect. Have you ever been the forgotten child in your family dynamic? Has someone ever tried to make you pay for your own displacement? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama and standing up for yourself. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that their self-worth matters more than keeping peace at their own expense. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. Until next time, keep believing in your own value.